Welcome back to AutoTechNick. Clearly we're back on the jet boat today. You can tell by my grin, we got the engine in it. It's going to be a great video, got a lot to cover. Mainly, we're going to go ahead and focus on all the mock-up and seeing what does fit and what didn't fit. Hang tight. So I think I touched on it on my last video, but my plan here is to take this boat fully through mock-up and get everything installed, fit, and where I want it. Once I have all that stuff done, all my brackets made, all my hoses made, I know all the routing, everything's done and set in stone. I'm actually going to pull everything back apart, take this all the way down, back down to a bare hole. That's going to allow me to do all my final polishing, touch-ups that I need to do, and it's also going to allow me to get the boat on the trailer without all this weight in it. And then I'll do the final assembly. So with that being said, all the work I've done on this boat at this point, I've had it on 3 jack stands. There was a few times I had 2 more jack stands in the front for some extra stability. Since we're in here and we're going to be doing all this mock-up, I'm going to be putting a fully dressed engine into the boat. There's a lot more weight and I don't want to create any problems or have any unnecessary weight on the hull. I did go underneath and I did block up right underneath the stringers, right up where the engine sits, with some steel I-beam and cinder blocks that I have. I'm going to go back to those extra jack stands, so we're just going to make sure that the boat's supported so that way it's stable, because we're going to be adding a lot more weight into it while it's here in the shop. Now let's talk about the mock-up a little bit. So for the most part, I have a lot of things already sorted out. So we already have our rail kit in, the fuel tanks are pretty much mounted. Way earlier in the build, we made a dedicated spot for our battery mount. We have a dedicated spot for our place diverter pump. So all of those items are things that I consider, they're standard, they're immovable. I can't adjust or change those, and they're all set in place. So I'm going to go about this dividing things into sections essentially. So I'm going to go ahead and install everything in the boat that's immovable that I just can't do anything about. It's where it's going to be, it has to be there. Now I like to focus on all those immovable items first, get them all installed. Then I go ahead and start installing all the discretionary items. You know, we're talking bilge pumps, blower fans, wire harness, control cables, fuel lines, plumbing. Now I prefer to do it in this sequence because when I'm installing all those items, I can work around all the immovable objects. I can go ahead and maybe route lines a little differently than I would have otherwise, where I can hide it underneath something that's immovable, or I can mount it to one of the existing mounts, and in the end it's going to give me a cleaner and less cluttered look. So with that being said, I need to focus on getting everything that's set in stone installed in the boat so we can work around it. With that, we're going to start back here on the transom, getting everything mounted up. And the first thing that I'm going to have to do to the transom is going to be painful and saddens me quite a bit. I need to drill the holes through it. So when we put in the new transom wood and I fiberglassed everything in, I already did some mock-up and drilled the holes through the wood and the fiberglass. But before I did all the gel coat work, I did overlay everything with some chop mat, fiberglassed it, and did the gel coat work. And that covered up most all of the holes that we have back here. And I had planned on doing that and leaving them all the way through to the gel coat. So now I need to go back through and drill those holes, which is going to clutter up my beautiful gel coat job. But it's just what we have to do so we can start getting things mounted. So, not avoidable. I knew it was coming. It just makes me sad because I hope it's not going to ruin the look of this too much. But we'll get through it, get them drilled out, bring you guys right back. It was unavoidable, guys. I knew I had to drill those holes. That's actually the bare minimum or the bare essentials that I needed. I actually did fill a few holes when I put in the new wood. So we basically have our holes for exhaust tips, for the transom cover for the pump, for my ski tow. And if you see those right there by the sides of the stringers, those 4, those are actually for our swim steps. So as I've mentioned before, this is a family lake boat and it had swim steps before. And you can see that I'm going to go ahead and retain those and keep those swim steps because they are tremendously useful for the wife and the kids, even myself, and I do enjoy having them. So the swim steps on this boat were originally just through bolted through the hull with 1/4-inch bolts. And you guys know me, my OCD and just my absolute overkill, I didn't really like that. I didn't think there was enough surface area distributing the load, and it made me uneasy. So, a long time ago, I took some flat aluminum bar, I think this is 3/16 thick, and drilled some holes, and I actually had this plated up back here, back onto the transom like so, just to help distribute the loads for the swim steps. And I had those on the inner mounts and the outer mounts on both sides. Well, that worked good, except this aluminum, the 3/16, was a little too thin, so when you cinch the bolts down, it would kind of bow out on either side. So we're going to go ahead, do the same theory, and we're going to make new ones, this time out of 1/4-inch thick aluminum. And I got these, they're like 12-inch sections, so I'll have plenty of length. I have some ideas with these. We might use these for some extra mounts, so hang tight. But what I want to talk about is my holes here for the outer swim steps right here on the boat. If we go up and in, they are on the other side of this mount, right back there behind the gas tank. Now, before I did all the work to this boat, that wedge for the mount right here was removable. But even when that was removable, the fuel tanks were not removable. Remember, they were fiberglassed in. It was nearly impossible to get to the nuts for the bottom mounts of those swim steps. And you would always drop the nut, and you're using stainless nuts, so you can't fish them out with a magnet. So I have an idea to fix that and really improve that. But also, on these wedges that I made for the fuel tanks right here, now that they're fiberglassed in place, locked in place, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have a little bit of an interference issue with where those are positioned versus where I want my reinforcement plate to go. So I'm going to go ahead. We need to pop the fuel tanks out. Now that we got the holes drilled, we can see how bad this problem is going to be and what we're going to do for a workaround. Now that we have our fuel tanks out, you can see loud and clear where the mounting holes for the outer swim step are. In particular, this bottom inner mount, or this bottom inner hole, is really, really close to this fuel tank mount that I put in. So I ended up taking my flat bar stock, I made a simple notch on it, and that is just going to allow it to go ahead and sit right up in there where it needs to be. Now I left this long on the top and bottom because I've not decided on the final length of it yet. We're going to hold off on that for a little bit later. Also, to kind of help with the problem I talked about where I couldn't get the hardware in on the boat behind the fuel tanks to get these mounted, I'm going to go ahead and use nut certs. You can see that I have them inserted in here, but I have not compressed them in yet. This is going to allow me to slide this bracket in, and I only need to worry about putting all my hardware in from the outside of the bolt. I don't need to worry about any nuts or washers from the back side. So that's going to make reassembly quite a bit easier. Now, as I was doing this, I was putting the nut certs in, and I was realizing that if you see the nuts right there, they have quite a good size of thickness on the head of them. And I realized that that was going to make these aluminum plates stand off because this head was going to sit above the surface of the aluminum and press into the gel coat. So I have a little adapter on the Dremel, and I just freehand dremeled them out and cut it down so that way I can go ahead and slide those in and make them flush and eliminate that problem. So I got those done for both the left and right side. We're all set there. Now I do need to make the other mounts for the inside swim steps, but I'm going to hold off on that right now because although I don't have any real obstacles on them, I don't know where I want to place these mounts. The reason why I say that is because I might use these mounts as a mounting point for some hose holders or some brackets to hold some other things. And that's going to go ahead and keep things looking clean and also maybe hide those aluminum plates a little bit. So I'm going to wait until we're doing the plumbing of the boat to go ahead and get those positioned because it kind of depends on the plumbing and what I want to do there. So undecided, I'm leaving that. But the main thing is I got these outer ones made. All my trimming and work is done so they do fit. So that's going to enable me to go ahead and get the gas tanks back into the boat. So now I'm going to go ahead and focus on finishing up this work on the transom. That means we're going to go ahead and get the transom cover on, get our exhaust tips on. I need to get the ski tow on. I'll probably go ahead and reinstall the fuel tanks, get the place diverter pump put back in, and get our battery put back in. Then I'll bring you guys all back. Now I do want to mention that why I'm doing this, guys, it's really giving me a good opportunity to work through all the hardware. So it's making sure that I have the right length bolts, all the washers, all the nuts that I need. So I am assembling this as if it would be for the final time, although it's not going to be the final time. So it's really let me get through and get myself organized, so that way the final reassembly is going to be that much quicker and nicer. Alright guys, it's coming along quite nicely. You can see that the fuel tanks are all the way in and mounted fully this time, and I actually was able to go in and finally drill the holes for these screws back here in these wood blocks. Got them mounted on both sides, so now all of my mounts are in. I have them screwed here. I have my brackets up on the top of the tank, and right up here on these bulkheads I got two nuts right there holding the tanks in. And again, we also have that aluminum angle that I don't have in the boat right now. I've decided to wait until final assembly to install those to preserve the polished finish as best as I can. Place diverter pump, it's mounted, screws are drilled, it's in there nice and tight. Tips are in. Now this is a good example of why I like going through and doing this mock-up in this order. My screws are too long, so I ended up having to take them back out. Cut maybe 1/8 of an inch off the screws, clean up the threads, get them back in, so we have the tips on. You can see that I have the ski bar or the rope mount on. I do anticipate probably next winter when the boat's down, that's going to get taken off and get chromed, so we'll leave it for now, but we're going to clean that up later. And battery's in, it's bolted down, so you can see with the battery mount style that I have, that bolts to the bottom. All the nut screws are in there ahead of time, and then it just clamps down on the bottom. So that does commit me to an Optima battery, but I do like the clean look without any hardware up on top holding the battery in. Really pleased with that. And transom cover is on. All the bolts are in. And one thing that I do want to say, or I think is worth noting, is I used all the factory holes where that transom bolt's on, meaning I have the pump back into the factory location, which all comes back to our intake install. So everything is back to where it was originally. Reused all of the same holes. Everything lines up just as it did before. So even though we did the modifications to the hole, did a lot of work getting it back in there, we got her dialed right where it was before it came back out. Now, as for the transom cover, I have all the bolts in except for the two down there at the very bottom. And that is because those, as most of you know, are very difficult to get to because they're back underneath of the intake and the suction housing. Now, the previous owners of our boat took some stainless bar stock here and drilled a hole to go ahead and disperse the load of the bolts that are back there. And they just had a nut and a washer on the back side of it. And I can tell you that I had the pump out a couple times, and these were a pain in the ass to deal with. Getting your hands in there to get the nuts on and without them falling off. And of course the nuts are stainless, so you have no option to use a magnet to get them. So I'm going to go ahead and revise these a little bit today. Now, I'm going to go ahead and clean them up so they're symmetrical in shape and fit, but I'm going to make sure they fit nicely, and then back to the good old nutserts. I'm going to go ahead and drill out the holes. I'll show you guys how these nutserts go ahead and clamp in, and that's going to allow me to slide these back underneath the intake, and then I can just get to the bolt from the outside and make it a much, much easier install. So I'm going to work on these, and I'll bring you guys right back with the finished product, and I'll show you how they fit inside the boat. You guys know the drill. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss out on this build. Follow along, jump in the playlist, check out all the old videos, see how we got here. For all of those of you that have been here all along, following the build, already subscribed, I thank you very much for that support. It does mean a lot to me. Let's get back to the build. Alright, so just a few minutes of work, and you can see that I got them cut to the same length. I smoothed and rounded all the edges. I also drilled out the holes larger so I get those nutserts in, and once again, I had to go ahead and countersink those nutsert heads so they sit flush, which was a little bit more work on this stainless, especially when I don't have the right tools. But we made it work. I got both nutserts in, but I haven't compressed them. I'll show you guys that in a second. Now you can see you can get nutserts in all different sizes, and one thing that when I install these nutserts, specifically when I'm drilling the holes, is I drill that hole as small as possible to where I actually have to press these in. Now that helps because sometimes once you install these and you're tightening them or even loosening them, they'll start to spin, and that really makes it kind of difficult to get out the bolt that you have installed. So by keeping these holes as tight as I possibly can and then pressing them in, it just gives me that extra insurance to make sure that they're not only relying on the crush to spin, they're actually pretty tight in there right now. So to install these, I actually have an installation kit that has all the different fittings with the rivet gun. Now I will say that you can go ahead if you're in a pinch, and you can take these and put a bunch of oversized washers around this riv nut, put a bolt in, and you can actually tighten that bolt, and that will kind of go ahead and collapse this. That method really only works if you're in a big pinch. If you're going to be using these quite a bit, invest in the tools. They come in real handy, and the tools make it real easy. So I already have this set up with the right size adapters, and it just has an arbor basically that pulls the threads down and in, which will compress our riv nut. So it's as easy as just spinning this nut on here. So the threads are already through, and we're going to just go ahead and compress that in. Like so, and there we go. Now that one didn't compress that much because this metal is so thick, but you can see where it's bulged out there versus this other side where it's not. So now this guy is super locked in place, nice, clean, and it's hopefully going to be a lot nicer to get these installed compared to how it used to be. So those riv nut kits and the installation tool, they are super cheap and easy to get on Amazon now. So really, if you do a fair amount of fabricating or building, I highly recommend that you invest in one of those kits. You'll find that you probably end up using it more than you ever expected, and it's one of those ones where you kind of wonder how you made through without it. Now that we have the riv nut in there permanently, you can see that it'll just take one hand from the outside of the boat to go ahead and get that screw tightened. And then you can just see from here, I'll go ahead and slide it down, and it's going to sit right about just like that. I'm not going to go ahead and bolt these in right now because the fact of the matter is I can't reach the bolt and the plate at the same time to go ahead and fight them in. I'll just wait till I have an extra set of hands to get those on, but for right now, for a mock-up, we don't need to install those all the way. I know that they fit before. We got the nutserts in. It's going to be a lot easier for us to go back together. So now it's time to move on to the next step. Alright guys, it is finally time. We got the build to the point to where it's ready to move on to the next step. A step that I have been waiting a long time for. It is time to get the engine in the boat, so we need to get the plates, the drive shaft adapter, flex plate off of this mock-up block onto our actual engine so we can get it in. And well, you know, the extra advantage of that is this crankshaft here, I kind of owe it to my dad. He's been waiting on it for a while, so that way he can put it in one of his mock-up engines. And I had it in this block so we can do our mock-up. Now that we're done, Dad, crankshaft's on the way. And I present to you the power plant for the boat. Now I will say that we're Chevy people, so it's a Chevy, and you can probably tell that, well, it's a good old big block. Now I'm pretty glad that I went ahead and wrapped this thing up and got it protected, because it's pretty filthy and dirty, all the dust that we kicked up. This has been sitting under the bench for the past 2 years while I've been doing the boat. So a little bit of foresight back then paid off now, because it's not nearly as dusty as it would have been. So get this all off. Now this engine's actually really fresh. Very little runtime on it, pretty well sorted out. Kind of a cool story to it. So we'll get into that in a little bit, but as you can see, it's pretty well dressed, pretty well fitted. It's gonna look great in the bilge with all that gel coat work we did. So you can start to see it kind of all coming together with what I had envisioned. So get this pulled off. There we go. Looks like we need to hit it with some more air. Now, when my father bought this boat in the mid-90s, it came with a warmed over 396, and this happens to be the oil pan and valve covers that came off that 396. Now, a couple of interesting things on that, if you guys can zoom in, and you notice that that oil pan has a Gale Banks Engineering sticker on it, which I always found to be a little bit odd. On top of it, for the valve covers, these are your traditional Mickey Thompson valve covers, but I've also always found a little bit odd, they don't have the flat billet strip on the bottom, nor do they say Mickey Thompson on them. I haven't really seen another set of valve covers like this, so I'm assuming they're a pretty early set, quite unique. Now let's jump back and talk about this oil pan for a second. But before we do, we got to go a little bit further. So the story on this boat has always been that it was at some point in its life, they tried to drag race it. They ended up deciding not to because it was too heavy. And then that's essentially where we ended up buying it. We were always told that we were the third owner of the boat, and we don't really have much other history than that. Well, as fate would have it, the second owner, so the gentleman that we bought this boat from, found all of these rebuild videos on YouTube, and he reached out to me and we started chatting, and I got a little bit more insight on the history of the boat, mainly confirmed what we knew, that we are indeed the third owners. He was the second owner and he bought it from one of his buddies. And the boat was indeed drag raced quite heavily. And the one thing that I learned that I really found interesting that I did not know, which comes back to that oil pan, is that this boat at one point in time had a Gale Banks twin turbo kit on it. Now, it does make a lot of sense because this boat, I mentioned that I do run an engine cover on it, but on that engine cover it is the original. And on the base layer right around the engine, it has a lot of unusual cutouts and a lot of space where I thought that was really weird. It's like they cut it out back here, the clearance for the snails, but it's way over clearance. It's not even close to needing that much clearance. And the top cover covers it, so you can't really notice what was done, but I always found it kind of odd because it looks like someone really overcut it, and you can't really identify the purpose to it. Well, that makes sense. Now that we know that we have that Gale Banks oil pan on there, it has provisions for all the oil returns. And if you look at all those early twin turbo kits, they sit back there and that's where all those cutouts were. So that leads me to ask you guys a question. In the end, what's cooler? Tunnel ram, 2 4-barrels, a Roots blower, or do we consider going back to one of those Gale Banks early turbo kits? Me, I've always kind of wanted to put a blower on the boat. I think a tunnel ram's going to be the good piece to get me held by until I can get to that blower. But it kind of got me thinking it would kind of be cool to put that setup back on. Certainly not something I'm looking to do right now. This engine's not really set up for that, but I want to hear what you guys think. What's cooler? Vintage Gale Banks twin turbo kit or an 871? So I grew up with a family of drag racers. I pretty much spent my entire childhood at the drag strip watching my father race his 1969 GTO drag car, which was powered by a big block Chevy. And as any racer would, he had a plethora of parts laying around the garage, and I can remember my entire childhood, specifically my late teens, always scouring through those parts. You know, I was a late teenager drag racing my red truck back there, trying to find any part I could to make it a little bit quicker. And unfortunately, everything he had was big block base, and I was running a small block. But I do remember all of those parts just tripping around, looking at them. And it's interesting because years later, about 10 years ago, we're sitting around bench racing, and he was kind of wondering what to do with those parts. He's not actively racing anymore. And we came up with the game plan to build this engine for the jet boat. So we kind of took inventory of all the old parts that he had, made a list of what we had, what we could build, what kind of options for engines we could actually string together, and then ordered the remaining parts that we didn't have, and spent the winter putting this engine together, and well, had a pretty good time with it. It was quite a bit of fun. We've built quite a few engines together over the years, and well, this is the most recent that we built. Now this engine was in the boat for about one summer and didn't really see a lot of use. He didn't really use it much as he was getting a little bit older, and that's kind of when the boat came to me. And he wanted to keep this engine around in case he could put it into a different car or hot rod. So when I got the boat, I ended up getting it with the 396 that was originally in it, and he kept this engine and we pulled it out. And it's pretty much sat ever since then. He never ended up getting a car and putting it in. It just sat sitting around. So I struck a deal with him. I'm going to go ahead and purchase this engine from him. The 396 is long gone, and this is what's going back in it. So I'm going to go ahead and get this flywheel cover back on the engine. We're going to get it swung and mounted into the boat, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit more details about the build of this particular big block. All right, let's go ahead and get this thing slid in. Got plenty of clearance. Go ahead and bring her down. There we have it. Let's go ahead and snug down our bolts and we should be set. There we go. Like butter. She is in. Alright guys, you can see the sun is dropping on me, so I gotta call it a day. Just ran out of time today. So we'll be back out here tomorrow morning. We got to finish all the mock-up. We got to do a lot of the plumbing. There's still a lot of work to do. I still need to run you through the specs of the engine. So with that, that's going to be all for tonight, and I'll see you guys in the morning. Alright, so last night we got the engine dropped in. Everything went really nicely, real smooth, and we have ample clearance down from our oil pan to our pump intake. And you can see down there, plenty of clearance. It's actually a good thing that I cut those bolts in the front down because they probably would have been hitting the oil pan. I was able to get down there, get my finger in there, and I could tell that I have half-inch clearance. So the engine's good. There's really no interference issues with it sitting into the boat, with the intake, with the hull. But I do have a different interference issue. In order to address that, we're going to have to go backwards, take the engine back out. I'll show you what you have. Hey, this is why I'm doing the mock-up now, so I can work through all these problems. I'm not rushing trying to get the boat assembled on the water. I know that I'm doing the mock-up phase. It's why I prefer this method. It's a great example. So just 4 bolts. We'll pluck it back out. I'll show you what I have. All right, so my interference issue comes into this rear plate and my log exhaust. Right here, my exhaust is hitting that plate, so I'm unable to get it bolted up onto the head, as you can see as such. So I pulled the engine out, and my plan of attack on this is go ahead and pull the rear plate off. I'm going to bolt up both exhausts to both heads. And then I'm going to go ahead and actually make a template of the existing rear plate on this cardboard. That way I can go ahead and trim that cardboard, get it to fit, see how much I actually need to end up cutting off of that plate. That'll give me the opportunity to kind of play with the design if I'm just going to make a little, U cut here, if I'm going to trim the whole plate down a little bit. And then I'll go ahead, once I make that decision, transfer it onto the plate, get that plate cut, and we should be able to move on to the next step, get the engine back in, and get the exhaust put back on. So, enough jaw jacking, let's get to it. All right, here's where we're at. A little bit of cutting, a little bit of figuring, got our template in there, and you can see on the right side, I just half mooned it, got plenty of clearance. I'll probably soften these edges right here on either side, but for the most part, gonna leave that side just as it is. On the left side is where all the problems start. Too many things trying to occupy the same space. So you can see that I have the bung back here that's interfering with where the engine plate would be, and also this water fitting. Now this water fitting, we can move that around and spin it, make some changes, so that's not a big deal. I went ahead and saw this interference and decided to go cut everything out just to see what needs to be done to get it to clear. I don't really like the way it looks. It looks too cluttered, unthought out essentially. And this is all happening because this side of the engine, obviously the cylinder head is sitting further forward, so that way this snail is sitting further forward. That's why I have all these clearance issues. Over on this side, we don't have any issues. Let me jump you up to the bench and show you guys the engine plate real quick. So here is the plate, and I went ahead and marked out my lines where my template is, where I would need to cut the plate. So here we have where the snail goes, that's where the bung is, and this where the fitting drops down. And look what we have here. Here's where our block sits for our mount. So we have definitely some conflicting space. So I could go ahead and cut this and either shave or trim this block and get everything to fit. But honestly, that's not really my MO. I don't really like that idea. I think that's just not the best solution. I was kind of looking at it and figuring, and I think that if I can go ahead and move this snail rearward some, it might buy me the space that I need. Hardened Marine does make an O2 sensor adapter that you can go ahead and place in between the snail and the log manifold, and that's going to give me an inch, which I looked down underneath, and I think an inch is going to get my bung clear of the engine plate, and that would hopefully give me enough clearance from the engine block. So I think for today, I think I'm going to go ahead and pull that snail off, leave that log on, put the engine back in, not make a cut on that engine plate. I need some time to think about that, make a decision, maybe order that part, and we'll have to come back to that. But I will make the cut on the right side of the engine plate so that way I can get the other side of the exhaust in and continue with our mock-up. All right, the engine is back into the boat, and we're already on to the next problem. It didn't take long to figure this one out. So it all comes down to the alternator mounting, and it all comes back to these logs. They're just in the way. They're not really designed to be working with this rail kit, but trying to make it work the best I can. So you can see that if I go off the alternator mounts right here, it's coming up and I'm hitting, not only am I fitting, but the back of the alternator is hitting the log. And I can't really tuck it in this little nook here. There's just not enough space to get it tucked in there. So I probably gonna have to end up doing some trimming here and cutting so I can get the alternator to fit and, you know, moving this mounting hole, or just abandoning this setup altogether and putting the alternator somewhere else. Now I do have the front plate that was in the boat previously, and we can go ahead and hold it up there about right there, and you can see with how much I would have to cut out right here that it leaves almost nothing for my plate. So I can't just go at it, go cutting. Is kind of what I'd like to do. Is I'd like to find a mini alternator so that way I can minimize the amount of cutting that will tuck up in there and fit nicely. The problem with that, since I have an enclosed engine bay, I need to have a marine specific alternator, and I'm struggling to find a mini marine alternator. I'm gonna keep doing some looking, keep doing some research, some thinking on this, and I think just like this riser back here, this is a problem that we're gonna have to come back to in a little bit. Because of our interference issue with the log manifold, our engine plate, and our alternator, made essentially what seems to be very little progress over here on the port side, but over on the starboard side, made lots of good progress. So you can see that I got the exhaust hose on. I did throw in the distributor, carburetor's on, and well, now's a good time to talk about the fuel system a little bit. So previously, the boat did have an electric pump back here and a filter. I went away with that system, and when I replaced all the wood on the transom, I did not re-drill those holes. So I do need to doctor those up on the back of the boat and finish that repair. But I'm moving away from the electric fuel pump, and I went back to a mechanical pump, which is going to require me to run a pressure regulator. Now, I chose to go with the mechanical pump for simplicity and safety. I didn't want to worry about having to wire in an oil pressure switch for a kill for the electric pump, and I didn't like the idea that the pump could be running all the time. So I just figured it's simpler, safer, and easier to jump to a mechanical pump. And I think it's going to be a little bit cleaner with the plumbing because it gets rid of a lot of clutter that was back there. So now that I got the carburetor on with the fuel line, pressure regulator, and the pump on, I can go ahead and scope out what fittings, clamps, and hose I need to complete the fuel system. Now that I have everything that's immovable and set in stone in the bilge, so we know what we need to work around, we can start working on some of the other items that are movable, so that way we can get them all routed and hidden and keeping this thing as clean as we can. So we're talking control cables. We need to work on our electrical, but what we're going to do right now is we're going to go ahead and jump over and deal with some of the plumbing. Now, right before my dad actually gave the boat to me, he went through and did a lot of work on all the plumbing on the boat. So he switched out all the old rubber hoses and fittings and replaced it all with stainless lines and A and fittings, which looked great and saves me a lot of hassle right now. So I have all that stuff laying out, and I'm going to go ahead and reuse most all of this. The one parts that I'm not going to reuse is the old fuel lines. I'm going to route them differently, but also for safety reasons, I'm just going to run new lines in there. All these water lines are very new, so that way they're good. I don't need to worry about them. I'm going to reuse them, so that's going to make it pretty easy for me to go ahead and just get those thrown on real quick, and then we'll see what we're working with. Alright guys, here's where we're at. You can see I got all the water lines on the front of the engine. For the most part, as expected, really nothing new there except for the fuel pressure regulator. I got some conflicting issues here with the routing of this line. Now the other end of this line does have a straight fitting. I flipped it around and I might be able to run the line right over here and on top of this regulator then down. This has a 45 on there now. Ideally I would like a 20-degree fitting. I found a 30-degree fitting, so I might order that and see how that lets me route this line. But I'm gonna say that the fuel pressure regulator and the fuel line to the carburetor and the fuel lines down to the fuel pump will take priority. So I'm gonna get those lines on and routed. Then I'll decide how I'm gonna go ahead and route this line. Obviously for these lines here on the front, there's no problems there. Now previously this boat had a homemade steel drive shaft cover that bolted to the front of the suction housing, and they actually welded a flat bar on here where this aluminum T-fitting was actually bolted down onto it. Now that we switched everything out, I got to figure out a solution to get that mounted, so I'm kind of doing a little bit of game planning there. I like the location and where the hoses, that all works, so we'll see. A little bit undetermined. And also the feed from the pump line here, I have it all back how it used to be, and honestly I kind of want to clean that up a little bit, so I'm gonna have to do some figuring. I have a little bit of a game plan. I might have to order some fittings, but I want to see if I can shorten this hose and just clean that whole area up some. But other than that, I have essentially everything on that I can. Now we do have our two remaining big issues, and that's getting this alternator to fit and also getting this rear plate cut to fit with this exhaust and the snail. Now I nearly neglected to show you guys that I did go ahead and toss on everything on the outside of the boat. So we got our raid plate on, our droop is on, and we got the place diverter on. I did so because I'm going to probably go ahead and just custom make all my own lines for the place diverter hydraulic controls. Also, I have some ambitious grand plans for all of my control cables, and specifically the routing and locations that I'm going to run them through the back of the boat. So I have all that mocked up now, so that way I can A, test out my theory, trial fit things, and get the length of the lines that I need, so that way I'm sure my ideas will work. We're going to cover that in a later video, but for now it's all mocked up and everything is set and ready to go. So I've gone as far as I can go today. I need to make a big order of parts, but there's still a lot of things that we need to address. Obviously we need to go ahead and figure out what we're going to do with this riser and the snail. We need to figure out what we're going to do with the alternator. I need to get all new control cables in. I need to get my place diverter lines in, finish this exhaust. I need to clean up all of the routing of that water line there. Bilge pumps need to go in, need lines for our bilge pumps. All the fuel lines we need to get in there. So you can see that I have a lot of things that I need to order, but I'm far enough now where I can kind of scope out what fittings I need, lengths of hose. I know my options on where I can route those hoses. I do have plans on how I'm going to go ahead and get all that routed, so I can get all that figured out, what I need to order, get my order in, and once all those parts come in, we can come back and finish all this mock-up and get all these systems installed into the boat. Alright, so let's get to it. Let's talk about what we have in the boat here. So clearly, we all know, big block Chevy, we already covered that. This one happens to be a 496, so stroked out 454, it's running 6 385 rods on it, it's running a mild 10-to-1 compression. The cylinder heads are out of the box AFR 305s. Now the camshaft, we did have Comp Cams whip out a custom grind for us on that. It's a solid roller, and this camshaft has 230, 236 duration at 50. It's running 627 lift on the intake, 640 on the exhaust, 113 lobe separation angle. And that, like I mentioned, that cam is made specifically for this wet logged exhaust. I will say, solid roller. We made that choice because we had all of the valve train on hand when we built this engine, so we didn't have to buy it. Plus, my dad loves to go in the shop and tinker, and he actually enjoys running valves, and we figured it'd give him something to do and tinker with. Well, now it's my problem, and I'll be running the valves, but it shouldn't be too bad, shouldn't need too much attention. So to top the engine off, it currently has an Edelbrock Super Victor. It is the wrong intake, it's too large. It's why we have this adapter, because that's a 4500 carb flange. We're running a 4150. That's the intake that we had on the engine when we had it dynoed, so I'm leaving it on there for now. We'll address that here in a second. But this total combination you see here, carbed oil pan on our terrible West Coast 91 octane pump gas, turned out 625 horsepower, about the same torque at about 5600 RPM. Now we are running a stainless steel A impeller on the pump, which if you look at the charts, we're actually pretty well suited for our RPM range, horsepower, and torque curve for our impeller, which should work out well. This is a fairly large boat, a little bit on the heavy side, so we got good moderate power, enough to have fun. We're not going to be the fastest on the lake, but we're not going to be the slowest either. Should be a good, solid, reliable turnkey mill. So back to this intake. I honestly cannot remember why that's the choice of intake that went on this engine when we built it, but I do know that the runner size of it is just much, much larger than the head ports, and it's larger than what we need. We don't have enough displacement on this engine. We don't have enough RPM to justify it. And also, I absolutely despise that carburetor adapter that's on there. I already have purchased a Victor Junior intake, which I'm going to swap out for this. Now, the Victor Junior has the same carb height, which is good. It just has much smaller runners, which are more appropriate to our 305 heads. I'm holding off on installing that Victor Junior because I want to get this boat all back together, get all the bugs worked out of it, get it on the lake, and I actually want to run it and see what our top speed is with this intake. Then I'm going to go ahead, swap out this Super Victor for the Victor Junior, put it back on, and it'll allow me to make another speed run. I want to see if it helped or hurt performance by dropping down to the other intake. So that's why I'm holding off now and running that one. And we'll swap that over later once we're back on the water. Now, I will say, I alluded to it earlier in the video, I do have strong ambitions to get a tunnel ram on this engine. Ultimately, I kind of think that a blower would be pretty badass. Although, we do have some issues with that, because if you notice my seat location sits back here, I don't really have enough room to run a blower without moving the seat or getting in the seat, unless I do a reverse mount blower, which is a whole nother world of problems, which I think is a project far, far, far down the road. But to get me by, I do think a tunnel ram would be quite nice. I actually think it would suit this engine quite well, and I think we'd pick up plenty of power over either of the two intakes that I have for it. But like I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead with my plan forward, get it running with this Super Victor, switch over to the Victor Junior, and maybe in a season or two, we'll stuff a tunnel ram on her and see what difference it makes. All right, well, we made some fantastic, absolutely awesome visual progress in the boat today. Honestly, this is really the fun stuff after months and months and months of just on the grind, working on stuff that's not very much fun. This part, super satisfying, very rewarding. It's fun starting to see it all come together. So definitely enjoying this part of the build, but we still have a long ways to go. Like I mentioned, we have a big problem with the alternator. Got to get that sorted. We have a problem with the left side exhaust. Got to get that sorted. I have a heap of parts that I need to go ahead and get ordered. So I'm going to go ahead and work on solving those problems. I'm going to go ahead and get all those parts on order. We'll cover all of those problems, details, and all that remaining work on some of the upcoming videos here on the channel. If you guys are new to the channel, consider subscribing. Stick around for a while. We got plenty more on this build. For all those of you that have already subscribed, I thank you so, so much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate the support. I appreciate all the comments, the likes, the shares that you've been giving me. Really helping this channel out. Really giving me motivation on this build. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel, and we'll see you guys on the next video.